bio, that's okay. He goes, that's a little too much. Just say I'm a fat guy. Well, and if you watch his videos, you know that like that's just the perfect jumping point, right, for what he speaks about. And so it's my pleasure to introduce my favorite fat guy, Dr. Dr. Cywes.
I'll use my fingers.
All right, and then the timer.
Oh, you'll switch the time. I am never, ever on time. Sorry. Anybody wants to leave, go ahead. Thanks so much. By the way, love my time in Louisville. My wife won a thing through IBM to do that to the Derby, and it was just fabulous. So really enjoyed Louisville. Great city. But yeah, you know, I'm standing here. I've lost just right around 100 pounds. But this doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. Right? This comes and goes. This matters. This is always fat. And the minute you forget that you're fat up here, bad things happen. So we'll get into this. And it becomes an enjoyable journey over time. But what we're going to talk about is the mental health transformation. And just before I get into it, I'm the director of the Society for Metabolic Health Practitioners. If there's anybody out there working in this space, dietitians, physicians, extenders, I don't want to do a Maria Emmerich, I don't know. But please join our organization. Just for example, now put out a, I'm sorry, okay, sorry. I thought I was loud enough without a mic, but you can tell I'll never make it on idle. But the SMHP is a really important organization for anybody who does what we do in the metabolic space. And, you know, grains of sand don't make a lot of noise when they fall, but if we stand together as a clump and form a rock, we're going to make some noise. And the US dietary guidelines are the ideal guidelines to put our species back into the bush. I mean, literally, we're going back toward being gorillas. And, you know, I just did my video that drops today talks about the difference between us and chimpanzees genetically is less than 1%. And we're really upplaying that 1%. So please, 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 join us, be a loud voice. We just sent a letter to the US Dietary Guidelines now as a collective, and we have to make some noise that as a species we're going backward. Okay, so this is the obvious. This is US Dietary Guidelines 101. Any form of caloric restriction, doesn't matter what the diet is, carnivore to the cookie diet, any form of caloric restriction results in weight loss, and any weight loss results in transient improvement in metabolic health. That is absolutely true. And that's the conundrum that we face. Because if you extrapolate from that, you then therefore say that, okay, if I reduce my caloric consumption, I lose weight and I feel better, then surely any form of caloric excess causes weight gain. So it seems pretty darn obvious, doesn't it? And therefore, excess caloric consumption must lead to obesity causing metabolic dysfunction, which is the standard principle of every single diet out there, and it is false. It is not true. The human body cannot and does not get fat when it eats food. Okay, we'll get back to that in a second. So here's the misconception that we've created. We created something called calories, which is something the human body has no concept of. It has no idea of what a calorie is. And if you are speaking in terms of calories, you're doing yourself a massive disservice. Okay? Please understand that the caloric impact when we eat food that contains calories are macronutrients. There's only three of them: carbohydrates, protein, and fat. The human body does not see them as energy. It sees them as a substrate. So when we look at those macronutrients, there are macronutrients that the body uses for energy, daily energy requirement, endurance, performance. It stores some of them as glycogen and fat. It uses it for temperature regulation. So yeah, there's an energy utilization. And then macronutrients are also used for tissue building, for growth, for inflammation, for tissue repair, for healing, to manage psychological and biologic stress, for strength, for muscle building, for daily cellular turnover, autophagy, repair of the body, regeneration. And nobody knows, not any smart people over here, sure as hell not me, knows what my body is going to do with what I put in my face. But your body knows. Your body knows. And it redistributes those things, and your body is so cool that it will take those macronutrients and convert them into other things. There are very, very, very few macronutrients that we have to eat. There are a few essential ones. That's what it means, we have to eat them. But for the most part, the body is extremely adept at interconverting. So one of the critical statements that we need to understand is that the caloric impact is always purpose-driven. In other words, there's always a purpose in the human body for the use of those macronutrients. The body is always doing something on purpose. And so this is where Ben, who's a good friend of mine, Ben Bickman from this morning, he and I disagree with a little bit. He used the word pathologic insulin resistance. It's not pathologic. That's the body doing something with what you're doing to it. And we'll just get into that in a few minutes. But what is important is that the purpose for which we eat drives or is driven by hormonal flux. So our hormones govern what we do for the most part with what we eat. And the body doesn't see calories, it sees substrate. And then it can interchange those substrates, can use them for tissue building, tissue repair, or for energy. So it's the substrate impact that's important, and nobody has a mathematical formula to calculate that. So if you hear, it's probably because you're struggling with your weight or your health, and if you're trapped in calorie mode, and you've been trapped in calorie mode for a long time, maybe doing the same thing over and over again is not a good way to have success out of something that's failed repetitively. Change and start listening to your body in that regard. The human body does not understand calories, and for anybody that watches my videos, I have to use a medical word, because if anyone ever tells you how many calories you need, they don't know shit about nutrition. There it is. So let's look at the different purposes of the human body. Well, the purpose drives hormonal imbalance to do something positive for the human body. There's always, always, always a positive purpose, even if it causes harm. So, for example, this little bugger over here, you'll see him running around. This is my son, Rian. He's been pretty much a carnivore since he was a sperm and an egg. And he's about a 95% carnivore. But the purpose of him eating is for growth. And his hormones are geared to do that. Okay? This is a buddy of mine, Zach Bitter, holds the 100-mile record. Runs 100 miles in 6 minutes and 20 seconds. I can't even, my imagination doesn't work even work that fast. But look at Zach. I mean, he is tiny, 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 and yet he eats massive amounts. Why? Because he runs 100 miles. 25 miles on a Saturday, 25 miles on a Sunday, the training run. Another buddy of mine, Robert Sykes, the Keto Savage, many of you know him, Keto Brick fame. He's a big boy. He's huge, but he'll cut, he'll build, and he knows exactly how to drive his hormonal imbalance toward making him good on stage as a powerlifter and as a bodybuilder. For those of you that have issues with health, happens to be diabetic ulcers, the human body will drive tissue repair, tissue healing, inflammation. And certainly, when it comes to our first world people, the Eskimos, the Bushmen, they have caloric drive, huge incentive to add caloric need because of food insecurity, and they will create intentional hormonal imbalances at certain times in the year to be able to store food adequately. We'll get into that. And in fact, this is an example that we see in some of these species. That is lipedema. Lipedema is a genetic condition where men and women, mostly women, collect their weight in the lower half of their body. Genes come from the equatorial area, and it is a very healthy source of, in fact, folks that look like this are often biologically some of the healthiest people out there when you measure their blood levels, because that's a healthy place to store fat. Okay? And that's a purpose-driven hormonal imbalance that results in that. Okay? And then lastly, we have obesity. And there's a purpose. There's a reason why we're fat. There is a biologic purpose why we're fat. We'll get into it in a second. Because that's obviously why we're here. So we're going to focus on that side. So healthy human nutrition is purpose-driven. Stop thinking in terms of calories, energy, and nutrients as separate. They're all the same. Okay? Biology only sees substrate, which becomes consumed and stored. So what we do as humans is we consume at a certain time, we store it, and then we use up our store. And that's an important concept to understand, because that is regulated by certain hormonal milieux. So if you look down the bottom over here, we've got a cow. A cow, big guy. in 2 different places he's been. But gorillas and cows are animals that subsist on very sparse, nutrient density sparse foods. They're vegetarian. So these guys, in order to get adequate nutrition in, they've got to be eating for 16 hours a day. Okay? So they're in a particular supply mode for at least 16 hours a day. Their hormonal drive is in a certain pattern for 16 hours a day. And they've got adaptations. They've got these huge big stomachs. Gorillas got a huge colon that allow them to, sorry, tell me if you can't hear me at the back, okay? That allow them to become as big as that. On the flip side, we've got the lion, who's a pure carnivore. Lions eat once a week, twice a week. Alligators, who are also pure carnivores, most of the large carnivores, eat very rarely. So Jason Thumbism is normal for a carnivore. In fasting, extended fast. That's what they do. And they'll eat, they're geared toward primarily eating animals. Now, here's an important statement. And again, as you've heard, I'm straight up. And you can argue with me all day long. I bring it on. There is no human species. There is no first human species that is a carnivore. Carnivores do not exist as First Nations because we're survivalists. And the beauty about being human is we've combined the best traits of the lion and the cow. We are scavenging, opportunistic omnivores, and our GI metabolism reflects that. But here's what we've done. Here's what we've done. We've traded this in, we've traded that in for this, for the brain. And in order to develop the brain, we've had to shift to a diet that is high in fat and high in protein. And in order to use your brain, well, if you're sitting there chowing down for 16 hours a day, it doesn't leave much time to watch Netflix. Okay? So what we've done is we've had to adapt the way we eat in our brain. And we actually grew up along shorelines. We evolved along shorelines. We had access to marine life. The only really essential fatty acids are 2 marine fatty acids, 3 and 6 omega fatty acids, DHA. And we also were opportunistic there. Animals come down to the water to drink. And from a plant perspective, the best plants grow along where the water supply is good, lakes and seashores. So a large part of our biology is adapted based on where we grew up. The important thing about that biology is here's what's happened. We've gone from our primate vegetarian ancestors where they ate 24/7 or they ate for a very long period of time, and our hormonal status has blended so that the ideal human state is to be anabolic, to be in growth phase for 2 short bursts a day. We're very tidal in terms of how our bodies work. And the anabolic hormones, the growth hormone, insulin. Insulin is not. Okay, you guys tell me, which hormone regulates blood sugar? Absolutely wrong. 100% wrong. Absolutely wrong. We discovered insulin. Banting and Best in the town I love, Toronto, Canada, did my PhD up there. They discovered insulin in type 1 diabetics. Type 1 had very high blood sugar. We discovered insulin, and from that day, we thought of insulin as being a hormone that regulates our blood sugar. It is not. Not in healthy human beings. We'll get there in a second. So the growth hormone, insulin, and as Ben said this morning, insulin has a bunch of other functions in every cell in the human body that have nothing to do with energy regulation. They control steroid hormone production, they control cholesterol production, they control the conversion of T4 to T3, thyroid hormone, they control all the steroid hormone production, testosterone, vitamin D3, that's the steroid hormone, progesterone, estrogen. Insulin has a bunch of regulatory activities that are not energy required. Human growth hormone, Ben talked about that this morning, critical in terms of certain hormonal imbalances. T3 is a growth hormone, thyroid hormone. Testosterone is a growth hormone. And some of the incretins that we're just starting to learn about now, GLP-1, GIP, hormones that control other hormones, those are used for building and storage. Now, if we're eating animal products, we're eating a human diet, an omnivorous or omnicarnivore diet, we're eating for a very short period of time. And there's a surge of these hormones that takes what we eat, stores it, produces protein, produces cholesterol, because that's what insulin does, produces all of those things for a very short period of time during the day when we're actually eating. And then for long periods of the time, the insulin goes up and then the other hormones take over, and we should be catabolic. And when we are catabolic, that's where autophagy happens, that's where cell repair happens, and at that time we're using what we've stored. So human beings should be in anabolic phase for a very short period of time, probably twice a day, and in catabolic for the majority of the time. There, ladies and gentlemen, is the hormone that controls energy balance in the human body. Glucagon. Because for the most part, our blood sugar should be low because we haven't eaten, and we should be supplying sugar and supplying fat, ketones and fatty acids from our fat cells and from our liver, and that should be occurring 20 to 22 hours a day, is where we're using glucagon. Cortisol is the other guy. Cortisol, as you've heard a lot about today, overrides insulin and glucagon. Because cortisol is an important energy provision hormone, up in inflammation, up in other conditions. It's a matter of mediums block some of the insulins and the human growth hormone, and the incretins we talked about, they actually function under both. We're just trying to work this out. I believe that the incretins are mostly, from what we've learned, just tell you a simple story. I'm going to go on for a long time, so let me know. But these are all little things that excite the hell out of me. Okay? So let's talk about one thing, GLP-1. Who over here had acid reflux when they were eating crap, when they were eating carbohydrates? What happened to the acid reflux when you went carnivore or got rid of went away, goes away. And every doctor out there, oh, this causes acid reflux, everybody wants me to get rid of my coffee. I have no reflux with my coffee, leave me alone. Oh, it's the wine, oh, it's the spices, oh, it's the BS, it's not. It's carbohydrates. Carbohydrates trigger GLP-1, and GLP-1 makes you feel like my favorite word. Okay? Because it delays the stomach, it makes you feel like crap, gives you reflux, makes you feel awful. And if ever you've tried GLP-1 agonists, the Ozempics or the Triglycerides, which are great for treating insulin resistance, you feel like crap when you eat a carbohydrate. Been there, done that, tried it on myself. So reflux is caused by carbohydrates through that incretin called GLP-1. But when you eat protein, when you eat meat, it doesn't happen. Reflux goes away. So it's a very, very simple answer to reflux. So next time your gastroenterologist told you, dude, I don't have reflux anymore. Okay? But I think it's very, very important to understand that a healthy human being cycles through anabolic and catabolic phases twice a day, and if you can replicate that to a certain extent, over time, not right away, but over time, you're going to restore that cyclical hormonal health. And that's what it's about. So, when it comes to purpose-driven hormonal imbalance that defines caloric impact, we've talked about all those other things, the growth and the running and the inflammation. Those are the anabolic substrate impact, where we get transient in order to heal, in order to grow. If Zach Vitter's going to run 100 miles, he needs to create hyperglycemia. He needs that sugar. We need to create hyperglycemia at certain times. Those Bushmen, those Eskimos, create hyperglycemia before winter in order to gain some weight so that they can survive the winters. So hyperglycemia is not a bad condition. It's a fine condition for short periods of time. And hyperglycemia triggers insulin release to store that food. So instead of having a short storage period, we've now got a longer storage period. That hyperglycemia, hyperinsulinemia, is a physiologic response for almost all of the somatic or the body-based hormonal responses. Obesity, diabetes, metabolic syndrome is exactly the same process, except the purpose is not biological. We'll get to that in a few minutes. So it's important to understand the purpose for which we're eating and not to demonize hyperglycemia, hyperinsulinemia, or carbohydrates. You've got to look at why. Why does my body want this, or which part of my body wants this? And a high carbohydrate, low fat diet, chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption exclusively. When we talked about reduction in calories, loses weight, gets better, the only thing that makes us fat is chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption, period. And I'll take on anybody who wants to argue with me about that, okay? Because as Ben said earlier on, you cannot have obesity and those other diseases without the persistent hyperglycemia and hyperinsulinemia. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But without those, you can't become fat. The only driver of those is carbohydrate consumption. Sometimes necessary, sometimes not so much. So the standard American diet is a diet that creates insulin resistance by forcing the body into a state of persistent hyperglycemic hyperinsulinemia, resulting in inflammatory glycoliposis, sugar and fat overstorage, and through that mechanism, other diseases. Now, here's the next little thing that most people don't understand, don't even know. This is usually about being a scientist who works in a clinical environment. Only chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption drives insulin resistance. We've said that, okay? However, now genetics and the environment come into play. Now genetics and the environment come into play. Why are some people fat and other people diabetic? Genetic. So if I look at, where are they? Vivian? Where are you guys? I've got two of my patients back there, husband and wife, Vivian and Anders. They've given me permission to talk about them. Vivian is obesogenic. She walks past a donut and she'll gain 5 pounds like that. Yeah. And I've measured it, we measure blood work in our office all the time. She produces a massive amount of insulin. Anders, on the other hand, walks past a donut and his blood sugar goes up by 50 points. He has type 2 diabetes. Both of them have done phenomenally well. They've lost a ton of weight. Diabetes is improving. But that is based upon genetics. So how your body behaves when you eat a lot of carbohydrates, that depends on your genetics. So people that produce, this production, I haven't worked out the mechanism of that completely yet, but people that produce high levels of insulin are obesogenic. They will gain weight very readily because no matter how insulin resistant they are, for the most part, their pancreas can produce more insulin to shove that sugar into their liver, into their fat cells, as Ben said, where the sugar gets turned into fat. In fat cells, you've got de novo lipogenesis, the new production of fat. The liver does a great job with that. But fat cells and liver is where you turn sugar into fat for storage. And when you produce a lot of insulin, you can drive that in. And the liver does not need insulin to take up sugar. It helps, but it's not necessary. The fat cells need insulin. And that's why Ben is quite right, that the fat cells are part of the problem. When you switch that off, when you switch off de novo lipogenesis in the fat cells, then your blood sugar starts to rise. And that'll happen in anybody. But the high insulin producers become enormous before they become particularly diabetic. And you'll be insulin resistant, of course. But one of the things to understand is you probably do not have a doctor who checks your C-peptide level, who checks your insulin, who will do an insulin and glucose tolerance test, who checks your A1C. They're all obsessed to the point of perversion about your LDL and your cholesterol and your HDL. And those don't matter at all because they're driven by your glucose dynamics, and yet none of them even know what a C-peptide is. It is ludicrous. That's where it is, guys. So you've got to look at your own genetics and say, okay, am I a high insulin producer? Now, high insulin producers will be mostly hyperinsulinemic. So the damage that happens to your body is mediated by persistently elevated levels of insulin. If you're a guy, you're going to have low testosterone. Girls are going to have PCOS, high testosterone. Your risk of dementia, your risk of autoimmune disease, your risk of cancer is much, much higher if you're obesogenic. But you can be enormous and pretty darn healthy, especially if you've got lipedema, which is the healthiest form of fat gain, because that's what insulin does. And your blood sugar may be slightly elevated, but it's not in diabetic territory. Then on the other hand, if you're a low insulin producer, you're going to be diabetic. Your blood sugar is going to be very high with moderately elevated insulin numbers, but very, very high sugar numbers relative to insulin. So they're hyperglycemic, and the damage to their bodies occurs because of hyperglycemia. Those are the folks that are higher at risk for a stroke, a heart attack, for vascular injury, for organ injury related to vascular ischemia. There's two different patterns based on your genetics. Some people who smoke get lung cancer, some people who smoke get heart disease. Genetic variation. Same thing here. And most people that work in the field do not understand that. So ask your doctor, and here's the evidence for it. Ben again showed a graph similar to this when he drew all those lines all over the place. Insulin sensitivity, and this is consuming 75 grams of carbohydrate and then tracking it. You notice we got 4 hours. Most of these tests run 2 hours. They don't give us adequate information. So get an oral glucose tolerance test. We do quite a few of these. Healthy. Glucose goes up, insulin goes up, and they come down very nicely. This graph should actually come down a little bit more. Insulin resistance type 1, early insulin resistance, is where you need to produce more insulin, and everybody does it. Produce more insulin, but your blood sugars are still manageable. So if you don't check insulin, you don't know that you have IR1. Oh, I'm completely healthy, la-di-da. No, you're not. No, you're not. It's impossible to be fat and healthy. IR1 is damaging your system. You just haven't measured it yet. Then we get to IR2, insulin resistance type 2, where your blood sugar is permanently elevated. And even though you have a good insulin response, the late insulin response, that insulin isn't really controlling the sugar adequately. Now we come to the split from here. Everybody goes through those 2 phases. But in this group over here, you can see the blood sugar is very high. They're not able to produce a lot of insulin. They may be overweight, moderately overweight, but diabetic. This group over here can produce massive amounts of insulin. They have diabetes. They have obesity. And the difference is the type 2s have hyperglycemia. The type 1s, the IR2s have hyperinsulinemia. Know your numbers, folks. Ask your doc. Doc doesn't give them to you. Give us a shot. Anywhere in the world. Okay? Happy to do it. Because my ethics lie to my patients. So it's important that we fight the system to be able to get what's best for our patients. That's just a little folks don't understand that. Now, type 1 diabetics, you look at this. They have a very, very flat curve. They can't produce insulin. Type 1 diabetics have lost the capacity to produce insulin, so they can't respond. And then we have, anybody carnivore? Anybody a carnivore here? Anybody been carnivore for longer than a year or 2 strictly? Do that. I've got a few thousand carnivore patients. I call them my veteran carnivore. Judy Cho, my veteran carnivore group. Okay? Do that. You have the profile of a type 1 diabetic. Once you become fat adapted, you are no longer able to respond to sugar. Now, if you remember, Ben this morning made a little bit of a sequence. You don't see it on these graphs, but he said that early little bump and a second bump. Well, the early bump is from GLP-1. Remember that hormone we talked about a little bit ago? GLP-1 is a hormone that gets produced by the upper intestine, the stomach and the upper intestine. As soon as it sees sugar, it says, dude, release some insulin. You got incoming sugar coming in, release some insulin. Well, if you eat a steak, GLP-1 says, ha, 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 no sugar here. So it doesn't give you that response. You got that flat response. Remember you showed the flat response in this graph? You got the flat response. Then that protein becomes sugar. Excess protein always becomes sugar. Well, you tell me, where does the body store protein? Doesn't. Tremendous capacity to store fat, some capacity to store sugar, zero capacity to store extra protein. So therefore, it has to convert it to sugar and fat. So if you eat that big steak and, oh, I'm a muscle builder, I have to eat 200 million grams of protein a day, I don't get enough. Bullshit, you don't. That's okay? We way overeat protein. But I know everybody else goes, oh, we don't eat enough protein. For most of us, we overeat protein for what we do. Okay? Now that animal over there probably needs to eat a bit more protein. You know, a vigorous game of chess for me is a lot of exercise. So not a lot of protein. But the point is that we convert extra protein to sugar, but it happens 3 or 4 hours down the road, not through GLP-1. So now that sugar has to go through the liver, into the body, back around to the pancreas. The pancreas is the last organ in the body to see systemic blood. Okay, we can talk about that tonight if you want to. But the pancreas is the last thing to see blood. So now my blood sugar is going up, and your cells are saying, dude, I don't need sugar. I'm full of fat. I'm fat adapted. I'm using ketones. I don't need your silly sugar. So your blood sugar builds up. Your A1C starts going on, Sean Baker, with an A1C of 6 point something. And I love Sean. He's a good guy, but why do they explain it? Oh, your red cells live longer. That may be true if your triglycerides don't go up, if your uric acid doesn't go up, if your BUN doesn't go up. So it's not just one number. One number doesn't tell a story. But those people, when you test them, they have a flat insulin production curve. Because there's no incentive, no drive by the cells. They don't need sugar, they're living on fat. So they behave just like a type 1. And a few years ago, sorry Ben, I coined a term called insulin suppression. Insulin suppression. And for this reason over here, human beings are not best in a long-term carnivore state. Early on as a therapeutic intervention, it is ideal, but we need an insulin trigger. And Maria does a great job with that. Protein sparing is a good way to trigger insulin. The problem is, I've tried it with my patients, I've tried it with myself. I don't know how good people feel doing protein sparing. Me and my patients don't like it very much. We're hungry, we're overeating, it makes us feel miserable. So we've had to find other triggers for insulin. And that's just my personal experience. I love what Maria does, but what she says hasn't worked for me. And I struggle with that, and I want to talk to her more about that. Having said which, insulin suppression is an important thing to understand, and it is the entire biology. So carnivore is an excellent, probably the single best therapeutic diet you can be on. But long term, we've got evidence now that it probably isn't quite as healthy for the rest of your life as it should be. So we do 2 phases. We do a therapeutic phase to get you better. Then we convert to a preventive phase of eating, where we want that insulin bump twice a day. So, okay, now I'm fat, I'm insulin resistant, my doctor said I'm pre-diabetic, which doesn't exist. So what do we do? What do we change? We change what we do. We go on some, and Eric Westerman loved that idea, the therapeutic low-carb diet. And it's absolutely true. The best therapy for insulin resistance is changing your diet. So we change what we eat. Oh, sorry. And we go on Atkins, which failed. We go on paleo, which failed. We go on keto, which is busy failing. We go low carb. We go ketovore. We go carnivore. All failed. But we lose weight. We lose weight. We lose weight on all these diets. So a low carb, high fat ketogenic diet is a diet that restores insulin sensitivity by forcing the body into a state of ketogenesis, where it's living off fat rather than sugar. And you can see some of the metrics that we look for. Those are my ideal metrics. Watch my videos, don't take the picture. But folks, here's the problem. 98% of diets fail, including ketogenic diets. And what do I mean by fail? Everybody does well with them. Everybody does well with them. Okay? But if you want to know how well the diet works, subtract your current age from 100. That's how long this diet has to work for. Okay? I'm 28 right now. That is 80, 72 years of life left. That's what a diet is supposed to do. It's supposed to keep you healthy until the day you get dropped and you get knocked over by a truck while you're out for a walk. Okay? So diets fail, and everybody in this room is probably in some state of failure. Think about that. Okay? So obviously we're here. Now I'm going to get to my talk. But the last slide here, the data is there. This is a beautiful paper done by Danziger. It's one of the ones that we've bought into very heavily because the science was well done. You look at people who were on the Atkins diet, way back. Actually, I misspelled Atkins in the previous slide, but they compared it to all the other diets. And this is a problem we have in the ketogenic space, is that when other people say, well, my diet's just as good, they're all as good. They're all equally good for weight loss. And that's the problem. They're all equally good for weight loss. And if you look at that, the problem is not that people didn't lose weight. They didn't lose a huge amount of weight, but they all failed. This is supposed to be a one-year study. Some of these folks hardly, I mean, for me, 2 kilos, that's a big bowel movement. That's not weight loss. So, and this is 8 weeks. And the problem with lunge, that's 1 year. I've got to live another 72 years. That's a hell of a long time for me to do this. And that's the problem with diets, because we change what we eat. And everybody out there talking about what we should eat, what we must eat. Diets change what we eat. But diets do not address the purpose by which we had the hormonal change. Diets do not address why we overconsume. And everything about nutrition is purpose-driven. We eat carbohydrates to excess, to the point of harm, and then ignore the harm. So there is no biologic purpose to being morbidly obese or having type 2 diabetes. So what is the reason? The root cause has little to do with food or nutrition or diet. The root cause is it's a surrogate for dysfunctional emotion management. The root cause of obesity, of type 2 diabetes, is a substance abuse problem at best. Addiction or possibly even obsessive compulsive behavior. And that's what we're going to, this is where I'm starting my talk. So for those of you who aren't coming now, you can come in. Okay. So that change away from what we eat to why we're eating is the most important thing, because we go on a diet for a reason. Because we're fat, because we're diabetic, because we have cardiovascular disease, because we want to get fit or healthy. We don't address that. Humans converted, and we've done this several times, the Egyptians did this, a number of other folks did this. Humans converted to a plant-based diet because of food security, not nutritional value. Human nutritional value is best from animal products. Our biology, our evolution demonstrates that. By becoming plant-based, we gave up nutritional health for food security. And that's fine to get out of food insecurity toward food security. But for the first time ever in human existence, we now live with ubiquitous food availability. Most of us live our lives within 50 yards of a 50, I need a drink. Does that mean they're dehydrated? No, it isn't. It's an expression of, I'm having some emotional tension, I need relief, alcohol is my vehicle. Nobody has to breathe air through a cigarette. So when someone says, oh my God, I need a cigarette, it's an emotional event. And in the modern era, when a fat person says, I'm hungry, it has nothing to do with nutrition. Hunger has become an expression of, oh my God, I'm having an emotional event here. I need a drink. Oh, I'm not an alcoholic. I need something to eat. And what they're specifically referring to is crystal meth. Nobody's chasing down lettuce or broccoli. So hunger is no longer a word we use for nutritional requirement. Hunger has become an expression of emotional need. So alcoholism is as much a hydration problem as carbohydrate addiction is a nutrition problem, and nobody tells an alcoholic what they should drink. Nobody tells an alcoholic what they should drink, but we love to tell fat people what they should eat. The internet is full of those evangelists. Okay? So therein lies the problem. It's been hijacked. Obesity, the obesity treatment has been hijacked by a group of people who don't understand addiction and are still focused on what we eat rather than why we're doing it. What we eat is fine for athletes and other people like my son, eating for a particular biologic purpose, sure. Tell me what my best food is, but we've got to start with the addiction side. And that's where longevity comes in. That's where sustainability comes in. Salt and water. By the way, hydration is not about water, hydration is about salt. Human beings, I'm segueing here, but human beings are the only species, the only mammalian species that pees dilute urine. And everybody says, hydrate, 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 drink more water. BS, it's salt. If you consume salt, it will tell you when you're thirsty and it will tell you when you stop. And nobody overdrinks water unless we consciously force ourselves to. And then we pee dilute urine, and it's not in our best interest. Hydration is important, but not drinking 64 gallons of water a day. That's crazy, okay? However, absolutely, salt and water are for hydration, and alcohol is for the drug that we use for endorphins. Everybody understands that with great clarity, but in exactly the same way, protein and fat are nutrients on the macro level. They're essential for human survival. There's a biologic, hormonal, negative feedback system between our brains and our bellies. We'll talk about that in a second. And the body will not allow you over time to become severely obese on protein and fat because it doesn't drive insulin resistance. Sugar does. And if we equate carbohydrate addiction with alcoholism, then we're beginning to understand what the problem is. We're beginning to understand the why. Okay, so every day, every human being experiences stress, anxiety, frustration, depression, anger, fear, exhaustion, pleasure, boredom. They're all emotions. Collectively, I call that emotional tension. And here's another little BS thing that we all buy into. Oh my God, I've got so much stress. Every human being has the same amount of stress. None of us have more or less stress than anybody else. Because it isn't about the stress of our lives. It's about what tools we have in our toolkit to handle the stress. And fat people have carbohydrates and cobwebs in their toolkit. Get rid of the carbohydrates. Cobwebs are not a very good way to handle stress. Okay? So, there are two different types of emotion management systems. One is inherent to being human. It's been taken away from us in large part. The other one is a dysfunctional surrogate. The first healthy emotion management system, and this is towards sustainability, the first healthy emotion management system is called an effort-based emotion management system. Let's say I have a rough day today, I'm all pissed off and angry, and I get back to my cabin and I'm sitting there and I'm stewing. I didn't bring my dog with me, but normally every day my dog gets leashed up when we go for a walk. So now I'm walking on the track. That walk, I had to pay a price up front. I had to put the effort in. I had to make the time to go for a walk. That means I've got to switch off Netflix. But if I put the effort in to, let's say, physical activity, as I'm walking, I have to put the effort in. I pay the price up front. That's why it's effort-based. But as I'm walking my dog, slowly over time, the world gradually just dissolves around me. I'm focused on my walk. The emotional tension evaporates. But because there's a time component, now in that meditative space that I create with exercise, or with, I hate the word exercise, I use physical activity, because it's more comfortable for us to do. But as I'm being physically active, it's a huge endorphin rush, but gradually over time, and while I'm out there walking and doing my thing, my subconscious can now show me, can reveal to me the traumatic effects of the emotional tension, things that happened to me, the issues of the day. So I can process why I had that fight with someone today. I've got to apologize to them. I can develop a game plan for handling emotional stress while I'm on my walk. And by the time I come back from that walk, number one, I'm emotionally relaxed. Number two is I've got a game plan for dealing with the issue that triggered my stress. And most importantly, and this is crucial, if I love the walk that I went on, if I love the effort I put in, irrespective of how long or how far or how fast I went, I can unconditionally approve of the fact that I am proud of myself. I can self-validate. And if I self-validate, that self-validation in little increments builds up self-esteem, self-confidence, and self-respect. And that is crucial in terms of a healthy, effort-based emotion management system. Now, as parents, when we grow up, there are two parental systems that prevent a child from developing an effort-based system. And an effort-based system has a whole variety of different things. It can be physical activity, which is the one that's really prevalent and predominant, and it should have a component of physical activity to it. But not everybody's an athlete. Some of us are thespians, some of us love music, some of us are more religious. I don't care what that dominant thing is. It should be preferentially a combination of all of them. The creative arts, meditation or spirituality, physical activity, empathetic human connection, sexuality, and then some instant gratifying substance like a glass of wine when you're having fun. That is a healthy, effort-based emotion management system, and each of us should have a highlight, one that's dominant. But it doesn't always have to be physical activity. And the reward is that unconditional pride and a better sense of self. Now, two family systems that preclude us from having that. In a permissive family system, oh, I'm going to do that. I've all the intention in the world to go for the walk. But then there's always, man, I've had a rough day. I'm just going to have one little shot of whiskey before I go for my walk. And half an hour later, bottle's empty, you passed out on the couch, the walk never happened. So permissive people do not sustain the behavior. They do not build up an effort-based system. On the other hand, you've got authoritarian people. Authoritarian people always set outcome metrics. I'm going to go for a 5-mile walk and I'm going to do it in 10 minutes. And they come back when they've done 4 miles and their Fitbit tells them, you idiot, you only did 8,000 steps, not 10,000 steps, you're pathetic. And then instead of feeling wonderful about what we did do, we feel like crap about some ridiculously perfect outcome that we didn't meet. And that gap then is filled with a sense of negativity, of guilt, of erosion to our sense of self. And we cannot self-validate, so then we look for an external form of validation, somebody or something that says we're good and we perform for others, or we use substances that give us a sense of well-being because we can't self-validate. So a healthy effort-based emotion management system requires the effort up front, the action, meditation, and then most importantly, unconditional self-approval. But when it comes to an unhealthy system, it's called an instant gratification system. And in an instant gratification system, the reward is up front. You have that cigarette, you have that shot of whiskey, you have that tub of ice cream, you get the high right away, but it's short-lived, and on the back end, there's negativity, guilt, harm, remorse, erosion of self-esteem, self-confidence, and self-respect. No matter what you show the world, your sense of self isn't further. And the harm is specific to the drug. If it's alcohol, you're looking at DUIs, liver disease. If it's nicotine, you're looking at lung disease, heart disease. If it's carbohydrates, you're looking at obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, PCOS, that whole laundry list. But carbohydrates are not the problem. Alcohol is not the problem. It is our relationship with the drug that is. Don't demonize the drug for the relationship. And all of these endorphin substances, heroin, opioids, crystal meth, crack cocaine, nicotine, alcohol, carbohydrates, those are the substances. And most of us in this room understand that to a certain extent. We've gotten rid of the carbohydrates, so why am I still fat? Because there are two process addictions you haven't dealt with. And when it comes to carbohydrate addiction, it is not just the substance, it's the act as well. And if you look at the endorphin activating processes, what's a process addiction? The obvious one. Gambling, sex, pornography, cutting, where you intentionally hurt yourself for that bizarre sense of pleasure on the back end. Procrastination. Anger, yelling, screaming, shouting, physical violence, spousal abuse, disruptive behavior, pornography, social media, gaming. Those are process addictions. And so is snacking and Rottweiler syndrome. What the hell are those? Okay? Aha, we're going to get there. But remember this, that chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption hijacks the brain and controls emotions, motivation, and mood. Carbs replace dopamine, serotonin cycling. Without carbs, the abuser loses motivation, feels sad, and depressed. So when you suddenly, tomorrow I'm going to start my keto diet, you feel like crap physiologically and mentally because you just killed your best friend. You're unable to perform normal functions physiologically, physically, or mentally. Addicts need a fix to get through the day. Happiness becomes absent and unattainable. When you're obsessed about, I must have that tub of ice cream. You're at the store at 11 o'clock at night buying drugs. Okay? That's because you're looking for happiness. And cobwebs don't provide happiness. So the result is chronic, unrelieved depression, anxiety, stress. Loneliness, we isolate ourselves. That's a consequence of addiction. The depression is a consequence of the relationship, not the relation causing the depression. And the goal of addiction treatment is to restore a healthy dopamine, serotonin cycling. And you cannot break a habit if you're still doing it. You've lost control of the habit. You can't break that habit if you're still doing it. You have to remove and replace your primary sources of emotion management. And you have to consciously force yourself to develop an effort-based system. Because an effort-based system doesn't just magically happen. My dog actually does come up to me now because I train him that way. He says, dude, let's go for a walk. But I had to set that up. So one of the biggest issues about diets is, I'm going to stop my diet tomorrow, I'm going to go keto tomorrow. And you feel like crap. Keto food is miserable. Because your body doesn't suddenly change fuel sources. So if this is going to be a lifestyle change, slowly de-prescribe carbs. The end goal is to be abstinent, but you don't have to eat the elephant in one bite. You're going to choke. Okay? So we've got to eat that elephant in little bites. Let's do it by segment. Okay, you know what? I love my rice. Let's leave rice for the end. Let's work on the pasta. Let's get rid of that. Let's work on one item at a time, but we are the tortoise, we are not the rabbit. Because rabbits crash and burn. Wean over time to abstinence by category. Some people can be the rabbit and they do great. The authoritarians do it to the nth degree, but when they hit a wall, they struggle. The permissives, they go sideways a little bit, but they take those little plodding steps. You keep doing that. So the therapeutic prescription is toward abstinence because here's the thing, folks. Obesity is not a disease. Obesity isn't something that a diet treats. Obesity is a lifestyle. It is your entire way of life. Who doesn't wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning with a 2-liter Coke under their bed and sips on it? I have a patient that did that. We are surrounded continuously by thoughts of eating and drinking. We're perpetually hungry. Obesity is a way of life. It's a lifestyle. And it's that lifestyle that has to change, and it doesn't change in a day. We could talk about insulin suppression tonight if you want. So, let's look at the difference between a keto diet and the addiction. In keto diets, carbs are the issue. Carbs are bad for you. No, they're not. Carbs are fine. We are humans because of carbohydrates. It's our relationship with carbohydrates that is the problem. And we use them to get high. Diets demand tight control. I have Alcoholics Anonymous. I do not have the capacity to control my drinking. I'm not an alcoholic, but it's a great way to go. So once you acknowledge, I do not have the capacity to control my relationship with carbohydrates, I therefore have to distance myself from them. You don't quit smoking by carrying the cigarettes in your pocket and telling you you're going to smoke less. You've got to crumple them up and throw them away. But what do we do as fat people on a diet? We keep a little bit of carbohydrates in the pantry. Oh, just in case. Or, I don't eat pasta. Or I bake for everybody else at Christmas time. Bullshit, you don't. You bake for yourself with somebody else's name attached. And if your husband or your child wants carbohydrates and you go shopping and bring them into the house, they have your name on them because you will eat them. I've made that mistake more than once. And then we have these allowed treats. Oh, it's a little treat. I've done so well. I'm going to have a little dark chocolate at night. Okay? Who doesn't do that? Okay. What you're treating yourself to is a little bit of obesity, a little bit of self-harm, a little bit of diabetes, a little bit of erosion of your sense of self. Enjoy it. Addiction is binary. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to be perfect. Look at me, I sure as hell am not. But it is binary so that you can recognize a mistake. There is never, ever, ever, ever a valid reason for an alcoholic to have a drink, and there is never, ever, ever a valid reason for a fat person to have a carbohydrate unless they're a diabetic who's overdosed on insulin. And that's not that many of us. So therefore, that's the way we recognize mistakes, because we're going to make them. We have to work in the concept of mistakes if we're going to be successful, because you will make them. Nobody's perfect. Okay? We love to measure goals. I've got to eat this many calories. I've got to do this many steps. I've got all these apps and gadgets and devices, and come on, man. Your body doesn't work that way. How many calories should I eat? How many glasses of water should I drink? That is a recipe for brief success with long-term failure. Because we're changing a lifestyle. Lifestyle cannot be measured quantitatively on an app. Now, the apps are useful to this if you're learning about where carbohydrates are. What's the carbohydrate content of this? What's the carbohydrate content of that? But once you know that, you don't need an app to tell you how many carbohydrates there are in anything. No alcoholic has an app to tell them how much alcohol there is in a drink. It's yes or no. I mean, that is just such an obvious reality. Okay? Oh, it's healthy snacks. A glass of red wine is very healthy. It's got a lot of antioxidants in it. If I'm an alcoholic, it just doesn't matter how healthy it is. Okay? There's no such thing as healthy crystal meth. I love my friend Jason Fung, and I love his approach to intermittent fasting with a group of diabetic Muslims in Toronto is where it started. But when you start with intermittent fasting, it's forced. Intermittent fasting should happen because you no longer feel like eating. So it's a critically important part of what we do. But the reality is anybody who can't go 4 hours without eating has a real problem. So allow intermittent fasting to happen. If you want to start there or start with the carbs, I don't mind what that starting point is, but allow it to happen. Get back to anabolic, catabolic cycling and allow your body to do that. It's about removal and replacement, and a cheat day is not a cheat day. A cheat is a relapse. A cheat is a relapse. When whether an alcoholic has one sip of beer or gets hammered on a bottle of whiskey, it's crossing the threshold of permission that is the problem in addiction. And you've got to understand that. You're going to make those mistakes. You're going to do them. I do them. I still do them after 23 years. I'm probably the only guy on the internet that isn't internet perfect. So we learn from our mistakes. We own them, and you can only own them if you know them. And if it's binary, it's easy to identify mistakes as much as we don't want to acknowledge it to ourselves. Eating healthy food. Eating healthy food. Bullshit. Come on, man. Anything you eat that is not carbohydrate is going to be healthy. If you want to be vegan, if you want to be carnivore, anywhere in between, get in appropriate variety of nutrients. It doesn't matter that much relative to the magnitude of carbohydrates. So all these little factions are disruptive to our entire ketogenic movement. And Adele Hyde, rest her soul, she was just beautiful. She did such a good job of covering the entire spectrum of understanding that carbohydrates and our relationship with the problem, not what everybody tells us we must eat. So what you're looking to do is look at this from the addiction side, not the keto diet side. And the most important thing when you remove carbohydrates is understand why you ate them in the first place and make those changes. Figure out how you're going to replace their role in your life. And the next little bit towards sustainability is going to talk about that. Firstly, when it comes to eating, it's not just the measurables from the dietitian. This is this many carbohydrates, this is this many. It doesn't matter. Okay? All vegetables are carbohydrate, period. I don't measure any carbohydrates in vegetables. We've got 3 hard no's, no rices, no grains, no potatoes. But I've never ever met a fat person. If one of you is the first person, let me know. I've never met a fat person who had a rough day and rushed home and picked out on Brussels sprouts. Okay? It doesn't happen. So even if the Brussels sprouts contain carbohydrates, they're free. If you like them, if they disturb you, if you've got GI function problems from them, hell, you know what? It's obvious. Don't eat them. Okay? It's not that. But don't let anybody tell you you must not. I hate green peppers. I'm never going to eat them. But I'm never going to tell anybody not to eat green peppers. If you want to be carnivore, it's great. But you migrate toward carnivore. It isn't better. It's just easier. Okay? So we've got to measure total carbohydrates, not net carbohydrates. The body doesn't do math. Okay? We don't count vegetable carbohydrates. If you like them, if you eat them, either because you enjoy them or because they're part of a plate, knock yourself out. You're not fat because you ate vegetables. TUMAD is the ideal diet to restore that hormonal cycling. But if you eat 3 meals a day, it's not that critical. OMAD should happen. It shouldn't be forced. 1 meal a day should not be forced. And there are people that probably shouldn't be eating OMAD. We can talk about that tonight. But the ideal is to work toward 2 meals a day, and 2 meals a day happens when you are not hungry. I ate breakfast yesterday and this morning for the first time in years, and I feel like crap. I still do. It's just my body's not used to doing that. So TUMAD is the ideal. One of the other key things is we make nutritional decisions ahead of time. So if I decided last night what I was going to eat tonight, that decision is probably going to be for its nutritional value. But if I'm exhausted and I come home tonight, oh God, I'm exhausted, what am I going to eat? I'm probably in the line of McDonald's. Because it's almost always in the moment you dealing with your emotional state. But preemptively, we can be empowered to look forward to what we are going to eat. And the key thing about addiction is that it's empowering when you do the right thing. You want to feel good about yourself. And that empowerment is so important. So try to be preemptive about when you are going to eat and what you're going to eat. My wife and I discuss that every evening as I'm setting up my coffee machine, for the most part. Structural consistency is important even if you're permissive. One of the rules that we try to follow is the only time you should ever eat is sitting at a table with a plate of food and a knife and fork. Oh my God, but I can't, I'm a truck driver, I can't. If you're about to die of anorexia because you don't have the time to sit at a table with a plate of food and a knife and fork, eat. But until that time, the default option is not to eat. And if you're in ketosis, you're not that awfully hungry. It's usually, if you're starving, it's usually because of your head. But you don't have to eat if you can't make the time to eat. All these people that are eating their keto meals, sitting and working on their computer, or they're driving their car with some keto little meal, you're not eating for your body. You're eating for your head. And the sustainability comes down to having a sustainable structural consistency. For those of you with a dog, when you feed your dog, does your dog pull up the TV, pull out a cigar, pull over his friends, and have a whole social? No, he doesn't. He or she is laser focused on that meal. So we want, especially early on, focus on what you're doing. Don't be distracted, because your old addictive brain is going to take over when you're not structurally consistent. Another little rule: never drink your calories. Never drink your calories. We really want to learn to separate drinking for hydration and eating for nutrition. It's very, very easy to overdrink our calories. So when you're going to do, and the reality is this: human beings are the only species who doesn't only drink water as adults. I've yet to find somebody who can find a species who drinks other things. I mean, obviously your dog, you're going to feed your dog orange juice, that's fine. But in nature, human beings are the only species who don't just drink water. So we really shouldn't, mammalian species, we really shouldn't be drinking our calories. So all these smoothies, all these shakes, all these things in a bucket, in a jar, or whatever it is, try to eat solid food, because your biology is best to handle solid food. The only calories that we drink, wine, alcohol. As long as you don't do a drug transfer, I have no problem with alcohol. It is a wonderful instant gratification tool that we can use from time to time for pleasure, as long as you've got tight boundaries around alcohol. Now, if you don't like alcohol, or if you're recovering, don't do it. But don't demonize alcohol. Okay? Oh, but it upsets your liver's pro. A healthy liver doesn't care. No, you just said he doesn't. All right, so the default is skipping a meal. As I said, very few of us will die of anorexia if we skip a meal. And when you're in ketosis, it becomes very easy not to eat, as long as you're busy. At the same time, eating twice a day, and it doesn't matter when you eat. What do lions do after they eat? Sleep. Oh, but you must eat 14 hours before you go to bed because you're garbage, guys. Okay? The reason I eat later at night is because my most vulnerable time to snacking is between dinner and bedtime. So the obvious answer is push it deeper into the evening. Okay? Make it practical. It doesn't matter when you eat. It doesn't matter when you eat. You eat but you plan it ahead of time. So if I'm going to eat at noon and at 6 o'clock, I'm going to plan that ahead of time. That's more important than when you actually eat. Figure that out for yourself. Fat and salt are condiments. They should always be added to your food. Don't ever be afraid that the human body cannot handle adequate salt. The human body is very well adapted to handling excess salt, but it cannot handle salt deficiency. It trades out magnesium, potassium, calcium to retain salt, because salt is crucial to human survival. And your salt levels are a flat line. The human body cannot handle excess sugar. And if you're wearing a CGM, I've got a CGM on me right now, your blood sugar levels are doing this if you're a carboholic. And that water retention, the water changes, are changing all the time. The human body cannot handle an excess of sugar, but it can handle a deficiency of sugar. So it's the polar opposite of salt. And in the blood vascular system, they do a lot of the same properties. Every molecule of salt retains 6 molecules of water. So when you're bloated and your ankles are swollen, it's probably because of sugar, not because of salt. Okay, we can talk more about that tonight. I'm probably going to run straight into The next kind of advice is this. You can get ideas from the internet. You don't get advice from the internet. Not from me, not from anybody else. My goal is to make you think. Nobody tells an alcoholic what they should drink, but everybody on the internet tells fat people what they should eat, and that's the problem. Okay, so this is the way the brain works. The brain works like a window wash, like a rain on your windshield at night or during the day. So it's raining, the windshield gets more cloudy. As you focus, your dopamine levels go up. And then when it gets clouded enough, you can't focus. When the windshield gets clouded enough, you hit the windshield wiper, and it takes a second, and it does this, and it cleans the windshield, and then it starts flooding again. That's dopamine, serotonin cycling. That's how all of our brains work. The human brain can focus for around 20 to 30 minutes at any one time, and every human being has a serotonin activating quirk. You notice I'm talking with my hands all the time. That's my quirk. One of the little things that relaxes me. See this? Okay? That was a snack when I was fat. A snack is always, always, always an emotional event. A snack is something we do to activate that serotonin response. It is a mind-cleansing response. So is a cigarette, so is a little moment of prayer, so is getting up and chatting to your buddies, so is falling asleep while you're listening to me. All of those things are little mind-cleansing moments, and every human being has a quirk. When you're dealing with obesity, it is very, very important in terms of sustainability to understand the necessity of that. That is a picture of this cup right here. A snack is always, always, always an emotional event. So a snack is necessary. A bridge is something we can drink. Instead of Coke and M&Ms, that's now coffee. And my coffee contains either no calories or just a little bit of heavy cream, and I'll explain the cream in a second. Maybe this is a bias of mine. But a bridge is something that you consume for emotional reasons that doesn't contain calories. And I don't care what it is. It can be water. Water doesn't do it for me. But it could be, oh my God, you can't say this. It could be a Diet Coke. It could be Fresca. It could be Gatorade Zero. I don't care what it is. It doesn't have to be perfect. As a physician, I've never written a death certificate to someone that died of Diet Coke toxicity. So if that's your bridge, are you going to tell a heroin addict they shouldn't use methadone? They have to go to cold turkey. Are you going to tell a smoker trying to quit they shouldn't use nicotine or nicotine patch? Of course you are. That bridge doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be perfectly clear of calories. And you know what? If you want to lean on Diet Coke, knock yourself out. Not ideal, not perfect, but it's perfect for me, so leave me alone. Okay? Now, my heavy cream in my coffee, that extra fat is an appetite suppressant. So if I'm going to put cream in my coffee, it means I'm on that. Okay? When I drink black coffee, it's because I'm eating twice a day. So that's just my little way of helping me to recognize that OMAD. And you can argue with me, that's not a perfect explanation, but it works pretty darn well for me. And we're talking about sustainability. Anybody ever seen a Rottweiler having breakfast? Okay? And it's gone and it's begging for more. Over the last 50 to 70 years, human beings have lost the capacity to self-regulate quantity. So it doesn't matter what you're eating. Steak, it doesn't matter what you're eating. Okay? The way we decide, well, you tell me, how do you decide how much you're going to eat tonight? But how do you decide how much you're going to put in front of you?
How big your plate is.
Right, so we have a preemptive idea about how much we think we need to eat. Oh, I've eaten the whole damn OMAD, I must eat half the cow. So we have a preemptive idea about how much we think we need to eat. Or we go to a restaurant and they have an idea of how much they think we need to eat. My wife's not as tall as me. She's quite a bit shorter than me. But if we order the same food, they put the same food in front of us, we both finish the same. So what we've done is we eat like Rottweilers. And insidiously over the last 50 years, our portion sizes have grown and grown and grown. And our brains have adapted to that. So here's an interesting fact for you. I'm 6 foot tall, I'm not very active. A little bit. How much nutrition do I need to eat in a day to be nutritionally neutral? Forget about calories, forget about weight loss. To make up all the nutrients I need to eat. Let's use something that's got everything in it. Let's use eggs. How many eggs do you think I need to eat to be nutritionally neutral each day, a 24-hour period? Anybody know? 6, 12, 10. About 1.5 to 2 eggs. Okay? So everybody in this room way overeats. And yet we're worried our nutrition is not adequate. That's lunacy. Okay? But that's because we've been instructed and institutionalized to eat more. And we eat more often. So now, not everybody's just going to eat 1.5 to 2 eggs a day. But what we want you to do is to see how little you can eat rather than see how much you can eat. And the way we do that, you're not going to fix the Rottweiler. Oops, sorry. There's a ghost in here. So the way we fix Rottweiler syndrome is to eat sequentially. Because another stupid thing that the internet tried to do to me is tell me to eat slow. Come on, man. But here's the way you do it. In the kitchen, if you're preparing food at home, you dish up however much you think you need. Dish it up, put it on a plate, and then cut that plate in half. Not virtually, but take half and put it on another plate. Half or less. And then you take that smaller plate to another table. My dining room table is 8 feet from my kitchen, but it's a world apart. You sit and you finish that pathetically small amount, you put the fat and the salt on, that is your satiety hormone. Triggers those hormones from the intestine to the brain. So your brain is told and decided, hey stomach, this is how much you're going to get. Well, I'm going to give you 50% of that. It takes time for the four hormones from your gut, the GLP-1, the peptide YY, the somatostatin, to go back to your brain. And the lectin from your fat cells to tell you you've had enough. So you finish that pathetically small amount of food, 10 seconds, it's gone. Then you get up and you do something. My wife and I have a cribbage board on our table. Every now and then, we'll play cribbage because I'm idiot enough to think I can beat her. Or we get up and we do the laundry. We take the dog for a walk. You do something. You leave a place right there on the table because you're reconditioning your brain. Then when you've given your brain 10 or 15 minutes, because remember, dessert is relaxation at the end of the meal. So doing the laundry, losing the game of cribbage, those are little relaxing things. Those are part of an effort-based system. So I come back 10 minutes later, you tidy up the dishes. You go back to the kitchen. If you're still hungry, eat that second portion. You're going to eat it anyway. It's not a crime to eat it. But most of the time you'll say, you know what? Screw it, I'm done. You put it back in the fridge. And the main reason why I'm mostly carnivore is because my dog at the end of the week does not eat leftover salad, but he will eat a leftover steak. So there's not a lot of science or biology behind that. But the point is, under those conditions, most days, you're going to eat 50% or less than you thought you needed. But now you've given your biology a chance to work. You've given and you're retraining your belly to send a signal back to your brain to say, hey, dude, you're full. But now you're doing the anti-nutritionist thing. You're not planning how many calories you need to eat. Your body is telling you, just like your thirst center will tell you how much you needed to drink or needed to eat. And utilizing that hormonal feedback is going to be purpose-driven. That's what we're looking for. I'm not going to say anything more about that. Okay? Is that an effective emotion management system requires the investment of effort and time to build up a sense of self. And remember, the best weapon against addiction is a great self-esteem, self-confidence, and self-respect. When you self-approve, you don't need anything external to you to approve on your behalf. Not drugs, not people, because they'll always let you down. Stress does not cause relapse. It's the absence of an effective emotion management system that results in going back. My permissive patients can benefit from external people to uphold the structure. If you've got family members, if you've got a partner, that helps you to sustain the effort. Authoritarians need to trade in perfectionism, outcome metric, for compassion. If I'm happy about the fact I went for a walk, rather than only depending on my Fitbit to tell me how far I should walk, that's what matters. I far more value a 5-minute walk on a crappy day than I do an hour-long run on an easy day. Because that's what sustains me. Return your locus of validation to self. And remember, you will screw up. Nobody quit smoking the first time. Nobody quit smoking the first time. But you recognize it, you crumple up the cigarette, you try again. The problem with diets is, this diet didn't work for me, I'm going to try this one, I'm going to try this one. Because we're changing what we're eating. The only way to get rid of the carbohydrates repeatedly until that becomes a new way of life. The wholehearted living requires the abstinence of carbohydrates and endorphin time. Carving out time every day for yourself as your fortress of solitude. Replacing the fridge and the pantry as your primary go-to for emotional management. And redirecting that. Those are some of my patients. That is sustainability, folks. So metabolic health depends on restoring the fat glucose hormonal feedback cycling. Some days you need more, some days you need less. Nobody knows, but your body knows. You want to restore cellular structural integrity, and you want to restore a nutritional pattern of eating and an effort-based way of taking care of your emotions. And remember, if anybody argues with you, higher meat consumption has driven positive human genetic evolution. You can only find perfect happiness when you become content with your own imperfection. So I am the Carb Addiction Doc, and my time is almost out. I will be here in a few minutes again, I guess. If you guys have questions, please, I'm open to answering anything. If I don't know, I'll tell you. Sometimes I'm wrong, but for the most part, I will let you know what my opinion is, or if I just don't know something. But please feel free to ask me any questions you want to. And thanks very much for coming on the cruise. Thanks to Debbie for all the hard work.